So,
Okay.
Keshar, thank
Yeah,
you for joining us. And you're still up in beautiful, snowy, cold Minnesota, right?
I am. Yes. And we are in the midst of another winter storm. So I think we're getting 6-ish inches today and lots
Wow.
of freezing rain and all that fun stuff.
Well,
So,
I was just doing a check-in with you not that long ago, and you were talking
yeah.
about changing jobs and having
Yep.
selected your CEOs well, and I thought other people could benefit from it. And that check-in
Yeah.
was happening, largely because you're a People Leader Accelerator alum,
Yes.
and I like to keep up with what's going on with you. And I appreciate your time for the catch-up, and I appreciate you sharing your learnings with the audience.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Always happy to talk about people things and CEOs and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we'd love to hear more about your context too, especially for our audience who maybe hasn't encountered you before.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my name is Keshar or Kay. Either way, I respond to both. I have been in the startup space for over a decade now. Started my startup career at an organization called Hired in San Francisco, and then quickly pivoted to health tech, where I've been with organizations like Oscar Health, Galileo, Headway, Growth Therapy, and now most recently at Tulea.
Love it. Well, hey, actually, tell us a little bit more about where you're at right now. What do they do? How large are they at
Yeah.
this point? What's your team look like?
Well, that's very easy. The team is a team of one, Andrew. It's just me. It's me holding down the fort, which I like. I don't mind that at all. Tulea Health is a health tech startup. We actually partner with health systems to help them enable and launch ambulatory infusion services as well as specialty pharmacy services. A desperately needed area. If you or a loved one have ever experienced infusion care, you understand that it is ripe for disruption. It's a really wonderful opportunity to provide patients who are already in a vulnerable state with really exceptional care. So that's really what we do. We partner with health systems to deliver on that promise. The team is really small. We're a team of 11. So very, very early stage, which is great. We are split pretty dramatically between our corporate staff and then we have clinical staff as well.
I'm really curious and
Yeah.
learning a little bit more about like what does the HR work look like at that
Yeah.
early stage? Is it broader? Is it more focused? What are
Yeah.
you doing
Great.
right
Yeah,
now?
yeah. Great question. It's honestly, it's a little bit of everything. It's really building those foundational elements of the organization. So I would say my role right now, given that we are so early stage, I would say is about 50% very tactical, hands-on operational work, and then 50% kind of strategic, forward thinking, structural to what we're trying to build in the next, like, I would say 6 to 12 months.
And have you been at companies this size? I know you had gone early stage and have been broad, but have you been at companies
Yeah.
this small before?
Yes, when I joined Headway and when I was at Growth Therapy, both were very, very early. Not 11, but I think when I joined Headway, I think it was like 16 people. And when I was at Growth Therapy, I think it was like 20 people. So still very early stage, but I think where Talea is different than Headway and Growth Therapy is the rate of growth that we're expected to see. Tulea is growing more intentionally, more thoughtfully, and it's not that kind of like hockey stick growth that I am accustomed to with organizations like Headway and Growth Therapy and even Oscar Health when I was there.
I'm curious with that. How do you think about that prioritization? Because there are so many things that you could be putting in foundationally. What
Yeah.
allowed you, or what criteria or optimization were you doing as you were thinking about here's the pieces I'm going to focus on first?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is honestly learned experience coming from organizations where I was really early on, being able to understand, okay, when you're 1 to 50 people, these are some of the foundational pieces that need to exist in order for you to scale successfully has been really helpful. But then also being able to rely on wonderful mentors and PLA alums who have all been in similar positions in their career and being able to bounce ideas off of each other and say, like, hey, like, this is what worked for me when we were 30, 40 people. These are some of the programs that I helped launch and develop. And then also partnering with your CEO or your leadership team to really determine what are the key objectives for the business and how is the people team going to provide the scaffolding to allow that business to be successful?
Speaking of your CEO and kind of the critical
Hmm.
role that they play, how did your CEO think about when to bring in an HR person? Because I do
Yeah.
find that it is unusually early to have
Yes.
be dedicated at sub 20. So, had he founded a company before? What were the influences that made him go, "Oh, I should bring in somebody now"?
Yeah, I think what he realized was when you scale your talent function, the people team also kind of scales in conjunction. It's very hard to isolate one and not the other. So as we're growing the talent side, I'm hiring people, we're starting to think about forecasting and headcount and things like that. In conjunction with that are also questions that come along with, okay, how are we going to think about performance management? When do we want to do that? Or how are we going to pay people? Where do we want to index in the market? All of these things go together. So as he was starting to build out the talent acquisition arm, he started to realize like, hey, there are going to be people programs that tie into all of this work really, really rigorously. So we should start bringing in a people leader to help develop this now versus what I think happens is you bring in a people leader when it's way too late. So you bring in a people leader when you're already 100 people or 150 people, and you've got all of these bits and pieces that are living in different departments. It's all disparate. It's like the Wild West. People are just kind of doing whatever they want. And then you bring in a people leader who has to undo and remanage and reimagine and retool everything instead of bringing someone in really early who's able to build that foundation from the ground up from day one.
That feels like a strong signal from the CEO as the hiring leader that they'll be a good partner if they're willing
Hmm.
to invest early in that broader leader to do more than the executional talent acquisition work.
Yes, at least in my experiences, I've been, out in the job market when I've been looking for different positions in the past, and I'm speaking with leaders and they're telling me, hey, we're not ready to bring in a people leader now. And, their headcount is 150, 200 people. That's a signal to me that like you're maybe not thinking about the
Mhm.
people function as a strategic arm and lever to your business, rather the tactical operational elements of what the people team can do. So I think when you have a leader who's excited to bring in the people function early and understands and sees the expertise and value that you bring, that's a great signal that you're not only going to have a great partner, but you're also going to have a seat at the table and longevity at that organization as well.
I'd love to dissect this a little bit more. What are the right variables to think about around when is it the right time to bring in this broader people leader? There's probably a critical mass.
Hmm.
There's probably something about growth rate. If you're hiring two people a year, you're not going to get there really fast. What are the other criteria to think about in terms of judging when the right time to bring your first true people leader in would be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think some of the variables that you just spoke about are very true. I think you also want to think about the future state of your organization and when you're going to take the time to get there. I think there are cultural levers that you want to start pulling on as well when you're thinking about, as you're growing an organization to whatever headcount you foresee in the next 6 to 12 months. What are some of the cultural implications of doing that and thinking about the type of organization you want to build? And then thinking about your retention strategy for your current employees. If you have a strong culture and you have a great organization, which we all think that we do, how do you want to retain those employees and keep those people in the seat, especially as the market changes, evolves, becomes more competitive? These are really where those people programs can step in and be a real advantage to an organization, even in the early days when you're typically cost constrained, you don't have as many bells and whistles as some of the bigger organizations out there. Having really thoughtful, strategic people programs can give you a competitive advantage.
I like that. Let me play that back and tell me if I've got it right. There's an element of critical mass, and that can happen
Yes.
pretty early, like you're sub 20 right now. There's an element of growth rate, And then there's something about the expectation of the role. Like, what do we aspire to? It's not just delivering payroll and getting minimal benefits out the door. It's not just
Mhm.
butts and seats. It's, an expectation of how we will operate and how we will engage our human resources. If you have more aspiration, more expectation early on, then you might want to invest earlier than somebody else that just is looking for administrative and operational support.
I personally, I mean, I'm also very biased. I don't really see negatives to bringing a people leader on earlier than you think you need to.
Does industry matter in this, or does it at all? Or is it more just these other criteria we've talked about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's industry agnostic. I haven't spent as much time in other industries as maybe like other folks with more diverse experience, but I do believe is industry agnostic. I can't really see how a specific industry would necessarily impact the decision on when to bring in a people leader versus some of the variables that Andrew was just speaking about.
I could imagine, Jess, me trying to answer the question, might be something around growth rate. If you're in
Mhm.
tech, you might grow faster. If you're venture backed, you might grow faster, or even PE backed versus being bootstrapped. And so that's a growth rate. And then the expectations, aspirations might be different for a strong white collar workforce or professional services, or med tech seems obvious, like you'd want to invest more versus a different type of service worker or retail or something like that might be different.
Mhm.
All right. So, hey, we're giving guidance to investors and CEO founders now as well around when to hire your HR leader. I'd love to turn it back, Keshar, to how do you pick the organization and the leader that you work for? We know there are a
Yeah.
lot of people that are considering changing jobs or might be looking for a job. And so a job is kind of the entry point. But then if you have options, and I hope that all of our listeners do have choices about where to work, how do you make a good decision to make sure that there's a great fit with your CEO?
Yeah. Great question. And, one that's oftentimes very hard to answer, especially during an interview process. We all put our best selves forward, correct? It's very hard sometimes to get a real read of somebody throughout an interview process, but I think it can be done. I think for me, some of the signals are how I'm treated during the interview process. I mean, some of these are table stakes, but being thoughtful about my time, thinking about how they're putting me through the process. What does the interview process actually look like? Does it make sense for this type of role? I think answering some of those questions helps give you some picture of how the CEO is going to work with you. Oftentimes, for any type of people leader role, there's going to be some type of assignment, exercise, 90-day plan, something where you're asked to talk about or showcase your experience and expertise. This is a really great opportunity, I think, for you to ask the CEO some really tough questions around, what their expectations are of this person in the first 90 days. What are they going to be looking for? What are some of these key priorities? What are the things that are going to make this hire successful? And then getting a sense of what are the things that they're looking for and where do they land on the spectrum of being really, really tactical and administrative versus strategic and kind of, I think, company enhancing. So thinking about it that way. And then since most of my experience is in startups, but I asked for a call with the venture capital partners and do a call with them.
That
And
feels a little scary. That feels a little bit like a power play, Keshar.
no, not necessarily. I mean, you're in the seat. You're potentially going to be responsible for what a lot of people could argue is the most important part of the business, which is the people. I think it's well within your rights to get a sense of the culture of the leadership team and the CEO in order to make the most informed decision possible. I've never had an organization tell me no. They've always been more than happy to let me speak with the venture capital firm. I think if there's hesitation, that should also be a signal for you as well.
I love that though, because oftentimes the VC partner is also the board member, right? And so
Yes.
that is someone you're
Yes.
continually having a relationship with.
Yes.
I'd love to hear what types of things you talk about on that call. So you get on the call and what are your, a handful of topics that you want to make sure you definitely cover in that conversation with the VC?
Yeah. I always ask about the culture of the leadership team as a whole. How do the board meetings go? If you're not part of those board meetings, like what does that relationship look like? How do they interact? What are some of the things that they disagree on? How do they work together? Things like that, specifically about the leadership team. And then for the CEO themselves, I ask questions about leadership style. If this is a backfill, what happened with the last person? What are some of the reasons that this position is open? If it's a new position, what are their expectations of this position as someone steps into it? And then from the board member's position, how are they going to define success for this role? So I think getting that lens from someone who works very, very closely with the CEO is so incredibly helpful, especially when you start doing deeper questions into leadership style, management style, how they partner with other executives, things like that. You get to paint a really good picture of who they are as a leader.
I want to jump in with a question, Keshar. Did you do that the first time that you joined a startup, or did you learn that that was the way
No,
to go? I'm trying
I
to put
learned that.
ourselves in the shoes of our audience that
Yes,
might be in the first top job of their career
for sure.
and might be anxious about requesting that. I'm wondering, like, what prompted you to make the leap to make that ask?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's definitely not something that I did in the early parts of my career. I think the reason I started doing it was actually volunteered to me at one point in my career. When I was getting ready to join an organization, the CEO said, "We'd love for you to speak with a board member, our venture capital partner. Can you speak with them?" And volunteered this information and said, "I want you to get a better picture of who I am." And so that was given to me when I was least expecting it. And now it's something that I do in every interview process because having that conversation with that board member led me to one of the best leaders I've ever worked for. And I had such a clear picture of that stepping into the role. It made our relationship so successful that it's something I won't forego now.
Yeah, I love that too, as you use it as a chance to explore the dynamics of
Yeah.
the interactions between the leadership and the board, and understanding also the historical context of that role.
Yes.
I think that's so powerful. And then the clear goals. I think, like, what are the expectations? And sometimes people say, I don't know. And actually, that's really helpful too, of like, how much
Mhm.
do they know and where they don't? And then you get a much better understanding as a leader of what you're stepping into and where is their leeway. I'm curious, do you also ask about like the business model and
Yes.
what types of things do you explore on that front?
Yeah, I typically do that pretty early on in the process. I feel lucky that I have a pretty solid baseline understanding of the health tech space, especially just given my past experience and then also like through my education and some other things that I feel like I have a deeper sense of understanding. But I do that pretty early on in the interview process, like typically in the first call with the CEO, ask about the business model. Also, what is the goal of the organization? What is the end state? Are you looking to get acquired? Are you looking to go public? How are you going to get there? And then ultimately, how are you looking to drive revenue? Through what source? I think asking those simple questions can give you a good sense of what that business model looks like and whether you think they're going to be successful.
What are you looking for in a good answer? Because I feel like, especially when you join an early stage company, like they're
Mhm.
still looking for product market fit. Sometimes it's actually not the strongest business model yet, or that they don't
Yes.
have their go to market motion figured out. And so, for you, what constitutes a good or more, solid response versus one that falls short for you?
Yeah, I think it's okay joining an early stage organization if they don't have all of the mechanisms figured out, but they should have clarity on how to get there. So I think that's what you're ultimately looking for is a succinct, thoughtful answer versus, hey, we're not sure, but we're going to figure it out in the next 6 months. That is not something that you necessarily want to join right away.
Sounds risky.
It sounds very risky. And
Yes.
look, like you may be in a place in your life and believe in that organization and you want to take that risk. Absolutely. And sometimes those risks really pay off with tremendous rewards. I am a very risk averse person. So that would not fly for me. But
That
I mean,
says the HR leader that just joined an 11-person company.
yeah. Yeah.
For those who in our audience who aren't part of a health tech startup or haven't been part of this industry before, what are some of the things that you would look for, whether they're metrics or something else? Like, say they've worked in other industries and they're coming into a health tech startup and trying to figure out, is it good? What would you encourage them to look at that's industry specific?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I like to look for are patient growth metrics. So thinking about how are you acquiring those patients? Is there a marketplace play or are you just looking for like payer partnerships? How are you acquiring those patients and how are you going to grow that demographic? Another one that I typically like to look at is do you have clinical leaders somewhere on your board or on your leadership team? So that's something that I think folks are pretty good at indexing on. Like if you're going to grow a health tech business and you have no clinical leadership, I think that sends a pretty big signal and one that you should pay attention to. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but something to take into consideration. And then I also like to look at just the total addressable market as well. So, like, who are the competitors in the space and how are they doing? If you're an organization like Headway or Growth Therapy or Alma, who are all kind of playing in the same space, all tremendously successful, that's great. Then you've got a wonderful organization that you can join that has a really large addressable market. You can feel confident that they're going to be able to be successful if a lot of factors go correctly. But you want to pay attention to who the other competitors are and what their exits were, or how they're looking in the next 6 to 12 months.
Keshar, it's so clear that you have, firm foundations in understanding the business. Just based off of some of the high level questions that you talked about asking the CEO and TAM, total addressable market, and understanding competitors. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you built your understanding of the business through experience and through a variety of roles, and you didn't share the specifics of like how you ramped up your knowledge of the business. And that could be really great to share with our audience. Like, what
Yeah.
was that work to grow your understanding of the business?
Honestly, working with really amazing mentors has been incredibly helpful. Reaching out to clinical experts in that field and just having conversations, I think has been really helpful.
Like
What
inside your organization, or you found
I
them on
mean, both.
LinkedIn, or what?
Both. When I was joining Headway, I reached out to therapists. I reached out to my own therapist that I see and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about joining this company. This is what they do. Does that make sense to you?" And having a conversation with someone that they're actually trying to acquire and would actually use the product is really helpful. And then also going through programs like PLA, which are industry agnostic, but still build the foundations in terms of how to learn about a new industry so well that you're able to take those learnings and apply it to a new industry and be able to ramp up pretty quickly.
So replaying what I'm hearing is talk to customers
Yeah.
directly. Like, don't be shy about talking to customers. Try to understand the business, not just from asking questions of the CEO and CFO during the interview process, but actually try to understand how it works. And
Mhm.
is this a model that works? And how do they make money? And then, stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, like understanding how you can contribute to
Mhm.
the company's goals. How will people programs and people management impact what they're trying to do? Thanks for breaking that down for us.
The very first piece of it, you talked about mentorship. And one of the
Mhm.
questions I find from people who are building their careers is oftentimes, how do I find a mentor? And it feels kind of weird because, like, there's this artificial, like, do I just go and say, will you be my mentor version that I think most people have when they're coming into this thought of mentorship. And I'm curious for you, what did it look like to find
Yeah.
mentors who you could learn from and be able to build this body of knowledge?
Yeah. It's definitely hard to do finding a mentor that you click with, that you feel will help enable you to reach your professional goals can be challenging. And I totally was in the same bucket of like, do I just reach out to people that I think look cool on LinkedIn and be like, hey, will you mentor me? I think I was very, very fortunate that I had a manager that is probably the best manager I've ever had in terms of enabling my growth, pushing me, really seeing what I was going to be capable of. And it was on me to maintain that relationship. So, kind of like always staying in touch with her throughout my career, asking her questions on career moves, things like that. And then that kind of informal relationship became more formal, where we had more of a thoughtful discussion around like, okay, like, do we want to kind of make this like a formalized relationship? How often do we want to touch base? What are some of the things that you're looking for out of this relationship? Things like that. But it's important as you grow in your career, whether it's someone in your specific subject matter or not, that you maintain those relationships when you're at the company and when you leave. So you're able to reach out to those folks who have had an impact on you and as you've grown and developed and say, like, hey, I'm thinking about this type of situation in my career. I've seen you navigate it in yours, would love to bounce some ideas off of you. But it can definitely be challenging, but important to keep those relationships alive, in and out of a company.
That's so powerful of just that reminder of sometimes it's a convenience, right? Like they're
Yeah.
there, I'll ask them. And when they're not, how do you keep going on it? The
Right.
other piece that I love around mentorship that you mentioned was it's don't start with, is this a mentorship relationship? Start with a relationship and ask the
Correct.
questions. And is it useful? And do you want to go back and have that conversation, in the future with them? And if you find that there is good value coming from it, then you can formalize it, but start in this informal way, which I think is
Yes.
incredibly powerful. And I think is very wise advice when it comes to mentors. Because it's hard
Yeah.
for someone on the receiving end, if you go to them and say, will you be my mentor? It's like, I don't know you yet. It's tough, right? So I love that you're bringing it back to, hey, go on a few dates, figure
Yeah.
out if it's okay. And then
And
you can sort of make the
yeah.
commitment.
And test it out. Test it out with a couple folks. You don't have to just put all of your eggs in one basket. I've been fortunate in my career to have mentors that I go to for different things, and it's really successful. So it's not to say like, you have one conversation with one person and that's it. You can talk to other people, talk to people who have been really successful in their own careers and have had pathways that you admire, and just open up a dialogue and a relationship and see if there's a fit. I completely agree that you don't have to dive into a formal mentorship relationship from day one. Relationships, as they all do in all of our lives, evolve over time, and you can kind of see where that relationship goes.
Yeah, so wise. Coming back to your CEO, who's so
Hmm.
awesome, and
Hmm.
CEOs you've worked with in the past, sometimes the transition as a head of people into that role, I find when talking to clients or other heads of people that the expectations that they have of the CEO are like a regular manager, like that they're going to give me good
Yeah.
feedback. What are your expectations for a CEO who is useful and value, right? Like, and I think this is a challenge
Yeah.
for many of us who step into this role, especially when you're working with founder CEOs who
Yes.
often aren't experienced managers. They don't know how to have a great one on one. We are lucky sometimes that we find these magical founder CEOs, but they don't all exist. But I'm curious, what do you expect of your CEO and what makes a good relationship? And are there any, I don't know, norms or cadences or traditions that you reinforce with a CEO to be able to maintain that relationship?
I think for me, baseline expectations are I have a good sense of what you're looking for me from output in the first 90 days minimally. And then I have some type of goaling around 6 months to a year. Now, that can be a very loose framework. It can even just be like hire 20 people in the next 6 months. Like it doesn't have to be super formalized, but I need some type of goalpost to know what I'm working towards. Typically, CEOs are incredibly busy, pulled in a million different directions. They have oftentimes very little visibility into what the people department does, and oftentimes have no clue what a people department is even supposed to do. And that's really where you as a people leader need to step in and take ownership of that relationship. It's on you to say, like, give visibility. When I was working with prior CEOs, even if they didn't ask for it, at the end of each week, I'd say, like, hey, here are like 5 top things that I've got going on this week. These are the milestones I have. This is where everything is living. Do you have any questions? And just leave it at that. Always providing visibility. So there's no question mark of like, hey, I have no idea what Keshar is doing this week. And I have no clue what she's doing at all times. Always providing that visibility, I think, is incredibly helpful. I think having some type of recurring one-on-one. I know it's probably impossible for most heads of people and CEOs to find a weekly cadence just because everyone is extremely busy. I would say bi-weekly at a minimum, having some type of regular touch point where you can talk about what's going on in the business, what's happening in the next few months, things that you should be aware of. Are there any executive departures that we need to keep an eye on? Things like that, big things that you maybe don't have as much visibility into that your CEO does. So you can just be on the same page. And then constant communication. I think just always having that open dialogue. And it's on you to ask those questions and say, like, hey, these are the top 3 things that I've heard from you that we're going to be focusing on for the next few months. Is this right? Is this the direction I should be running in? Yes, no, and then go. So like those are like the big 3 things that I always have for expectations out of my CEO.
And that constant communication element in particular, is that like just trying to imagine this for people wanting to enact this? Is this like Slack or text?
Yeah.
Where you're just
Mine
like,
is Slack, a quick Slack message saying like, hey, we talked about this in our one-on-one. These are the top 3 things we're going to be focusing on. This is what I'm going to be working on. Does this make sense to you? Yes, no. And I think the more succinct and direct your dialogue can be, the easier it is for your CEO to respond to it instead of sending like paragraphs of text and like thinking about how you're verbalizing it. I have always found just like quick, direct communication to the point, easy for them to understand and respond to.
Advice for our listeners that's bubbling up from this discussion: be proactive.
Yes.
Proactively share. Proactively seek alignment and confirmation. Don't ask what to work on. What do you want me to do? Don't ask for little tactical decisions if you don't really need it. Share out, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm planning to work on next. Like, being a leader means leading, not
Yes.
being led. That's not a binary, like totally right, totally wrong. Like, of course, if your leader, your CEO is trying to take you someplace, get aligned quickly, but don't expect as much direction when you're leading the function as if you're a middle individual contributor in a much larger org.
Yes. And the first time you make that shift feels scary, when you go from, hey, I had someone, consistently telling me what to do to like, I'm telling myself what to do now. And I just have to kind of trust myself. It can be really scary. And it was scary for me the first time I did it too. But you have to trust and rely on your experience, trust your expertise, have your faith that you know what you're doing. You got the job because you know what you're doing. They trust you. And you have to just like do it afraid.
powerful, do it afraid.
Yes.
I'd love to pull a thread on being a team of one.
Yeah.
And how do you think about how to get leverage in your time? How do you think about prioritization? Sometimes with teams of one, it's like, I don't need to write it down because I'm only telling myself. And so, like, when do you lean on documentation and transparency and those things? And when is it just kind of like, it's okay, it's just me? If I add more team members, it's different. But right now, it's just me. Yeah.
I think future thinking, it's not always going to be just you. So when it comes to documentation, just document everything. Especially when you are a team of one and you're early, you inherit so much foundational knowledge about the organization and how it works that it can be so painful when someone new joins and they're like, well, I'm trying to do this thing. And you're like, oh, yeah, well, you have to talk to these 3 people and you have to do it this way. And you just know because you've been doing it that way for the past however long. But documenting these things, documenting the processes, streamlining them as much as you possibly can, to give yourself the leverage when it comes, so you're not reteaching someone 50 different ways to accomplish the same task. So yes, document everything. Document how things are done, document the ways of working, document, relate like how you like to partner together with your CEO, if that's going to be a relationship that this person is going to have. All of those things I think are incredibly important. And then I think thinking about how you want to work together with the person who's going to be giving you support is really important. So like as you start to think about what are some of the tasks that I do in my day, which ones are going to be giving the most leverage to my leadership team, which ones are not, starting to think about like, okay, can I potentially outsource some of these low leverage or low value tasks to someone like maybe more tactical, more operational, who can sit on my team and execute, giving you the freedom to kind of be more strategic and thoughtful and future planning.
And are there favorite tools that you have right now that you're using, whether it's part of the HR tech stack or just general productivity tools that you find particularly helpful?
I use Slack to the nth degree. I use Slack and as much of its functionality as I possibly can. That's what works for me, Slack and Asana.
Awesome. I love the automated reminders.
Yes.
That's clutch, especially for like a team weekly update type of thing. You can just
Yes.
have it
Yep.
auto send every week. That's amazing. I
It's
used
great.
that all the time when I was in house.
That's a good tip. I'm writing that one down. Yeah,
Yeah.
but hey, it's time, and time is headcount. And headcount is a lot of cost. So these productivity tools and devices are really, really valuable.
Yes.
There are a few questions that we like to ask all of our guests, and
Mhm.
would love to get your responses to our accelerator round question.
Okay.
We'll try to keep these bite-sized for the listeners and really practical, actionable. So first, learning. We in HR and we in the People Leader Accelerator community really love high leverage learning. If
Mhm.
you could recommend only one or two resources that our listeners might benefit from, would you suggest?
HR Heretics, I think, is great. It's a great podcast. It's a really nice combination of entertainment and learning. I would highly recommend that podcast. And if anyone is looking to break into the health tech industry, The Bitter Pill is a book that is about our healthcare industry and how broken it is. It was actually one of our mandatory readings at Headway before you joined, was to read that book. So I would highly recommend that as a learning tool.
I really like the marriage between the business and the HR connection there. And Kelly Dragovich was one of our very first guests, of course.
She's the best. Love Kelly.
All right. Hey, accelerator round question 2. What sentence or two of advice could you give to a listener about how to accelerate their HR career?
Invest in yourself. I think that's number one. An organization like PLA or an executive MBA, or there's a variety of other programs that you could potentially join. Invest in yourself. Bolster up that foundation. Get those foundational elements under your belt in terms of learning. I think that's a great way to do it. Going through an accelerator program has been a wonderful experience for me. Number 2, trust in yourself. Take the chance. Even if you think that the job is a little too big for you and you're not sure, just go for it. You don't know what you're capable of until you try.
Love it. Last of our accelerator questions. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yes, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I check all my messages all the time. They will not go unanswered. I think I'm the only Keshar Sheridan on LinkedIn, so it should be easy to find. But yes, please reach out to me on LinkedIn if anyone needs advice or help or just wants to connect. I'm happy to do so.
Keshar, thank you so much. And we really appreciate your time and your insights that
Yeah,
you've come to share with us
of
today.
course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.